And so what that leads me to is my first question being, what is the spiritual significance of marriage? Exactly, right? I believe that the spiritual significance of marriage, marriage has only been about love for maybe a couple hundred years. Marriage before a couple of hundred years ago was based on the fact that one person could not run a household alone, and most of the time one needed children in order to make a household work, and in order to do the various things that were required to make a small hunter-gatherer society or to make a small individual family farm work, you tended to need at least 2 people and hopefully a few more. So from a practical standpoint, I don't know that there was a lot of spiritual significance. Today, I would say that the spiritual significance of marriage is because bonding to another person and making promises to another person and agreeing to raise a family with another person or not raise a family with another person is about love as an unselfish act, is about wanting to make someone else's life better, about putting someone else before yourself, about working in concert and cooperation with another human being. That's the best thing I've got right now. How do I participate in political action via UUCWF? And I have like 3 questions about this, which I think means that it's a good, rich, ripe question right now. In my time here in this congregation, we have struggled to find enough people interested in the same political actions. Sometimes I say about this church that we are really good at feeding hungry people, and we are not as good at asking why hungry people don't have enough food. I think there are ways in which we could be more politically involved. I think we do a really good job of being socially involved and helping with the practicalities of helping hungry people eat. I think that there's some things that we could do in order to make the world more just. We've tried to have social justice groups, but we've sort of struggled because everyone has a different thing that they're interested in. And so when you have 5 people wanting to do a social justice group, but somebody's interested in climate change, and somebody's interested in racial justice, and someone's interested in, who we elect to Congress, it is hard to get enough momentum to focus on one thing. I honestly would say that probably the best thing that we could do for social justice right now is to get involved with something like Unite Oregon City, which is a local group that is working to make Oregon City and Clackamas County more just for the folks who live here, and I think that's a decent place to start. This is another question. I have several of these questions in this stack. So if I don't answer yours, I'm going to try and answer it all in this kind of overwhelming thing. This is the longest question. It feels like things are getting worse. Political polarization is escalating, and anger and distrust are growing within our communities. Democracy is under legitimate attack from within. Gun-related violence is escalating, as are attacks on minority populations. Tensions are rising around the world, especially with Russia's unprovoked assault on Ukraine. The threat of nuclear war has never been more real, at least in my lifetime. As an eternal optimist, I am more worried and pessimistic than I have ever been. How do we genuinely find hope during these scary times? And what action should we, as Unitarian Universalists, be taking that can actually make a difference? Someone else asked, how do I have hope in this time? Someone else asked, what do we actually do with all this? It's overwhelming. Someone else asked, I'm afraid that the world will end in my lifetime. Honestly, I think one of the things that we need to realize and I believe this to be true, and politics in America may be a caveat to this, because I think those in some ways are worse than I have seen them in my 54 years on the planet. But I think for the most part, 53, okay, sorry, 53. But I think something that we need to understand is that it is not necessarily worse right now, believe it or not. It is that we have news sources assaulting us from everywhere that are telling us all of the terrible things that have happened. More people are being fed now than ever before. More people have some kinds of basic human rights and civil liberties than have ever before. It is not so much that the world is in worse shape as the fact that we are hearing and learning more about it because of the news cycle and the internet and the way we hear everything from everywhere these days. And so how to cope with that is to not watch the news as much. I don't ever watch the news. And I would say that y'all seem to think that I'm reasonably well informed. Just humor me and say yes. But I read the New York Times, I read the Washington Post, I read the Guardian, I read the Oregonian occasionally. I read articles from places. I try and read articles from places that don't just share my opinion on some level. I read The Atlantic. I feel less assaulted by horrific images and able to live my daily life without paralyzation and fear, because I'm taking it in via words and not images. And I think there is both a combination of find something to do, find some way to be involved, find some way to make a difference. And you can't make a difference everywhere. You can't do it all. You can't. Compassion fatigue is real. Paralysis in the face of all of this is real. Do something. Do not cease to do something, but don't feel like you have to do everything, because you can't. And there were some specific questions about global warming later on in here, and my answer to that is that, unfortunately, as much as we would like them to, our individual choices don't make as much difference as we would like them to. We have to elect people who will make corporations make different choices, because that's, it is not our use of light bulbs or our recycling things that we feel better about recycling, but, don't get me wrong, I recycle everything I can, and yet I know that 90% of that is going to end up in a landfill. Climate change is going to happen on a systemic, corporate, national, international level. And so I think the most important thing we need to do with that is not get angry at our neighbor for throwing their pop cans in the garbage, but make sure we elect people who actually will make a difference in this, who will, follow the Paris Climate Accords, who will, and on an individual level, boy, do we need less stuff. We have so much stuff. I have so much stuff. We need to stop buying so much stuff. Okay, what is happening with the eighth principle? What is the eighth principle? This was another question that I have a couple copies with. The eighth principle, what is it and what is happening with it? The eighth principle, and I'm realizing some of you probably don't know what the 7 principles are. So let me start with that. The 7 principles are what we as Unitarian Universalists agree to affirm and promote in our congregations. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, democracy in our congregations and in society at large, encouragement to spiritual growth within our congregations, a world community with justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of which we are all a part. These 7 principles, and someone was asking how to explain that to their conservative Catholic family. We believe that our job is to make this world a better place in the here and now because we don't know what happens next. So our job is to make this world a better place in the here and now. And we believe that takes our efforts. The 8th principle was brought forth by Paula Cole-Jones and some other folks. It has been requested by Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism and DRUM, which is Diverse and Revolutionary UU Ministries. And it adds an 8th principle to those 7 that says that we covenant to affirm and promote, like we do with the other 7, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. That people get frustrated and hung up on the wording. You got to just let the wording go. The wording will be fixed later. But the ideas behind it are important, I believe. Somebody, in one of the questions, they said, what do you think about it? I think the wording behind it is, I think the wording behind it is important. I think the principle itself is important. I think that when a group of, not one person, but a group of people who have been historically oppressed that are inside of our organization ask us to do something that is directly related to oppressions and harms that they experience, that we need to not nitpick that and just do it. People of color in Unitarian Universalism have been asking for this, and we've kind of done this whole 1 step forward, 2 steps back thing. We have a lot to be proud of racially as Unitarian Universalists. We sent more people to We sent more ministers to Selma to march with King than any other denomination. 1 out of every 5 Unitarian Universalist ministers went to Selma and marched with Dr. King. And we have not been able to live up to all of that in our hiring practices, in our support of ministers of color, in our welcoming of people of different races into our congregations. It has been adopted by 170 congregations. We are hoping to have enough information in our congregation and have some conversations about it to where our congregation, I would hope, votes to approve that as passing and becoming an 8th principal congregation. And the Unitarian Universalist Association, in their updating of the principles and purposes, which is supposed to happen this year, will hopefully adopt that as they revise a few things about the other 7 principles. Okay. What would it take for us to move back to a weekly religious education program? More volunteers. We need more volunteers to teach RE. We only have enough teachers to cover classes every other week, because if you only have 2 teachers or maybe 3 teachers, and we need 2 teachers every day in the classroom, that's not enough teachers to make it happen. We really need 3 or 4 teachers for each of our groups in order to have religious education every week. And yes, we would like very much to get back to that. What do you see as the biggest barriers to reconnecting children to our congregations, and what do you see as possible solutions? I agree that we need more religious education teachers. I think that parents have different needs and desires around masks and vaccinations. Some folks aren't willing to bring their kids back until their kids can be vaccinated. Some folks aren't willing to bring their kids back unless everyone is masked. Some folks don't want their kids to wear masks. I think COVID is still a big barrier to bringing kids back to our congregation. I don't know about possible solutions yet. I am hoping that the vaccines are approved for all ages, and I'm really hoping that this pandemic calms down more than it has to date. Speaking of reconnecting children to our congregations, this is a good time for an announcement that I forgot to give Greg earlier. Today is Stay and Play Sunday, and so if you have kids here, kids are invited to stay at noon and play in the parking lot. I will note that they are playing in the parking lot, and so if you don't have kids and are not planning to stay for Stay and Play Sunday, if you can move your car before noon, that would be super helpful. Thank you. What volunteer work does this church do in the community? We do Feed the Hungry, which is the 5th Sunday, and that is packing food boxes and cooking delicious hot food for folks in Milwaukee. We do the Hope Food Pantry on the 3rd and 5th Sunday, and that is packing food boxes for folks who need grocery type food. And we're involved in the Supporting Our Neighbors program, which helps homeless families who are on the waiting list for the Annie Ross House. In non-COVID times, we hosted them in the religious education wing in our classrooms for 2 weeks, spring and fall. Now they're being housed in hotels for everyone's safety, and we bring food sometimes. Those are announced in tidings when you have a chance to be involved in that. When is this church 100 years old? Are there celebrations planned? This church is 178 years old. The church itself started in 1844. My math might be wrong. Somebody just redo the math. The building was built in 1924, I believe, sometime between 24 and 27. I always want to think 27, but I think it was 24. And yes, there will be some celebrations. We have not planned them yet. COVID has thrown a wrench in our long-term planning because sometimes we don't know what's happening next week. We will do our best. If you would like to be involved with that, contact me. Shouldn't there be one or two more comfortable, accessible facilities for ladies on any level floor of the building, especially for folks with mobility issues? Yes. The most accessible restrooms are in the religious education wing, and you are always welcome to use those. That is on the main level. There is a small restroom around this corner here, so there is a room that can be used for anyone on this floor. There is a larger room, a larger restroom downstairs. It is 100 years old. It kind of looks like it's 100 years old. What is taught in the religious education classes? Values, that it's okay to ask questions about things. Right now in our early elementary class, they're talking about, different things of church. What is a minister? What is a congregation? What is a pew? They're touring the church, and they talk to Stephanie, and so they're learning about their environment and what it is that we do here. Our middle schoolers learn sexuality education. They learn consent. They learn how to talk about sex. They get their questions answered. They learn about anatomy and physiology. They learn about safer sexual practices. They learn about gender identity. They learn about sexual orientation. Our high schoolers talk about what they want to talk about, which often ends up being kind of values-based stuff, learning about the world. How is UUCWF involved with General Assembly this year? Not much, to be honest. And it makes me a little sad. But I am going to be, Bill Sinkford, who is doing one of the worship services, has invited local clergy to be part of kind of an opening litany, and I'm going to be involved in that. If anyone is interested in General Assembly, please talk to me. It is our denomination's large business meeting, gathering, convention, and it's in Portland this year. It's 15 miles up the road, and it would be lovely to have folks be involved. Talk to me. Have I experienced the good stuff in Canada that I just did in Victoria last week? Yes, but not since I was a child, though I've been to Vancouver more recently. Who is my favorite Avenger? The immediate answer has to be Black Widow. It just does. I could overthink it, but we'll just say Black Widow. What is my favorite comfort read? I don't know. I don't go back and reread things terribly often. And yes, I'm pretty sure I know who asked this question. I don't reread things as often as I could, but I sure love The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver. Yeah. And what am I binge watching now? We just finished binge watching Heartstopper on Netflix, which is marvelous. It's a very, very sweet story about gay 15-year-olds in England. And something that I noticed and kind of loved was that most coming out stories, whatever and why ever, wind up being about sex. And this is really limited to hand-holding and very chaste kisses. And I think that that's just lovely, because it's really fun to have a gay television show you can totally recommend to 10-year-olds. So I like that. It's also funny and very sweet. How many spiritual traditions does the Unitarian Church draw from? As many as we can find in some ways. It depends on the minister and the congregation and the people preaching. We draw deeply from humanism, we draw deeply from natural mysticism, and those aren't the ones that are represented on the sign about all that. But I will tell you that I talk about those more often than anything else. I talk about Judaism, I talk about Christianity, I talk about paganism. Most of my talks we draw from Buddhism, we draw from, occasionally I'll talk about Hinduism. It depends on who you're asking. Other people draw more from Islam, if that is a more familiar tradition to them. But I draw more from mystic naturalism than anything else, I would say. If someone asks you, what is your elevator pitch? My elevator pitch is that Unitarian Universalism is a liberal faith tradition of people who believe in something greater than ourselves. And what that something is can vary widely. It can be God, it can be science, it can be the power of gathered humanity. But we tend to believe in something greater than our individual selves. And we believe that our job is to make this world a better place in the here and now, because we don't know what happens afterwards. What led you to become a UU minister? What did you do before coming here? Teaching sexuality education and coming of age to middle schoolers at First Unitarian Church is what led me to become a UU minister. I liked that we were encouraging kids and youth to ask those questions. I liked that this was a faith tradition that encouraged that. It took teaching coming of age for me to realize that this was not a religion made up in the 1960s, which says a lot about the places that I learned Unitarian Universalism, and says something about why at least once or twice a year I try and preach on history. And I also felt like I had been a spiritual seeker all of my life, and I had finally found an answer that made sense for me. And it took a lot of things that I really loved, having individual conversations with people, helping people through challenging times, reading and learning and writing, and then sharing that with folks. So it took a lot of things that I enjoyed and felt like I was pretty good at, and gave meaning to them. And I love my job. I really love my job. What did I do before coming here? Before coming here, I was the minister at Y East for 5 years. It's a small congregation, about 60 people in Northeast Portland. The last 3.5 years of that, I was also the minister up in Blaine, which is on the Canadian border. Yes, they are 300 miles apart. And somehow it worked reasonably well. I was at Y East on the 2nd and 4th Sunday, and I was at Blaine on the 3rd Sunday and every other 1st Sunday. But boy, did I want a place where I could be in one place, and I wanted a bigger congregation where I could be full-time, and I really wanted to have a staff and have other people to work with. So I'm super grateful to be here. I've been here 7 years, and I love it. Before I was a Unitarian Universalist minister, I had jobs, and I was a mom. I was an office administrator for a chiropractic practice. I worked as an office administrator for naturopathic medical practices. I worked as a bookkeeper in my kids' preschool, and I was a mom. Is the number of Unitarian Universalists increasing proportionately? Not really. No, I wish it was. But on the other hand, we are not hemorrhaging numbers like most mainline Protestant denominations are. So in that case, proportionately, perhaps we are. Why do people ask, what is the meaning of life? Because we are humans and we are curious and we want to know because we overthink things sometimes. Since becoming a minister, have I encountered any unanticipated joys or unexpected hurdles that you would like to share with us? COVID has been a hurdle. That's not, I mean, that was unexpected, but is not an unexpected answer. There was a time here where I did 6 memorial services in 8 weeks, and that's hard. That was hard. Because there is grief that we carry as your minister. I love getting to work with your kids. I love having conversations with your kids in the before times. The kids would all come up and I would read a story or tell a story, or mostly I would just have conversations, and that was a tremendous joy. There is also occasionally this deep, deep joy at being able to think about something and dive deeply into it and then share it with you all. That's just really cool. There are moments like that where I say, I can't believe I get to do this. Boy, we are running out of time. Can I still like Harry Potter and be supportive to the trans and gender fluid community? Yes, if you separate the art itself from the artist. We tend to do that a lot. Maybe don't go buy new copies of the hardback books. Buy them used, but I still like Harry Potter, and I consider myself supportive of the trans and gender fluid community. But you have to be able to, and for those of you who don't have any idea what I'm talking about, J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books, has said some really obnoxious and awful stuff about transgender women in particular. And so it's a big issue in particularly queer groups. And so I think it's important that one separates, I think it's possible to separate the art from the artist, but I think it's important to, if you're going to do that, to talk about the artist. When did Unitarian and Universalist groups merge? 1961, and this congregation was the only non-Unitarian or Universalist church to join the UUA at the time of merger, which is super cool. It's my super cool fun fact in UU groups. This church was Congregationalist. Most of the Congregationalists merged with the German Brethren and became the United Church of Christ, or the UCC Church. We remained an independent congregational church and started affiliating and doing church camp stuff and sharing religious education resources with First Unitarian. And then at the time of merger, we joined the UUA, and we were duly affiliated for about 40 years until we dropped the congregational affiliation in the early 2000s. There was a super quick question about what is the shortest way to describe the difference between Unitarians and Universalists. Unitarians believed that Jesus isn't divine, that there's just one God as opposed to the Trinity. Universalists believe that no one is going to hell, That is their beliefs in a single nutshell. Unitarians, we follow Jesus, we don't worship him. Universalists might well worship Jesus, but believe that God is too good to damn anyone to hell.